Qatar is not without fault. Women's rights and gay rights are restricted by Western standards. Migrant workers have indisputably been treated badly. But those statements apply to many of the countries around the world, including many competing in this tournament, and by many nations who've hosted major sporting events without anything like the furore that's kicked off about Qatar. We seem to have forgotten in England that in 1966, when we hosted and won the World Cup, it was illegal to be gay in our country. Moral halos appear to have slipped over some people's eyes and obscured some rather salient facts. For example, there's 12% of the population here are native Qataris, something we in the supposedly sophisticated West would never tolerate. The migrants who come here in vast numbers are sometimes mistreated. But the reason they're here in the first place is because the wages they earn are life-changing. And the global scrutiny of the World Cup has at least led to reforms in labour laws here. That will be an important legacy, and one massively lacking after 2 Olympic Games in China and a World Cup in Russia. Qatar is also a significant investor in many aspects of UK life. For example, it gives us 25% of our gas, which is food for thought, isn't it, as our national grid considers winter blackouts. Would all the virtue signallers back home prefer we tell Qatar to stop sending its gas? This tournament's brought the football-mad Middle East together as well. 2 years ago, Qatar was under a blockade led by Saudi Arabia, Bahrain and the UAE. Now fans from most countries are pouring in to enjoy the football. Saudi's Crown Prince was at the opening ceremony. The Emir of Qatar even waved a Saudi flag during their stunning win over Messi's Argentina. There's no denying the Middle East has a long way to go on human rights and many social issues, but so, frankly, do a lot of European countries. There's also no denying that this region, the Middle East, has long deserved its World Cup. And there's no denying, and I can tell you, this is what most people here are thinking, that right now Qatar's putting on a pretty good show. And frankly, when it comes to morality, are we in England really in any position to lecture the Middle East about laws or values, given the way we illegally invaded Iraq 20 years ago, sparking 2 decades of ISIS terror, and at last year's Euros final, showed the world that we're a bunch of coke-snorting, booze-sodden, brawling, firework exploding from backside imbeciles? Methinks not. Well, Hassan al-Thawadi is the Secretary-General of the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy, which is a fancy title for he pretty well runs the World Cup here in Qatar. He's the man at the helm of the most controversial tournament in World Cup history for reasons that frankly baffle me. And he spoke to me a little earlier today. I began by asking how he felt about Qatar hosting the tournament and how he thought it was going.
We're immensely proud of the World Cup, as you know, and everything that's been unfolded since the 20th of November. It's a moment of great pride. I mean, you know, just if you look at what's happening on the streets, people from all over the world coming in, celebrating. The stories unfolding in the pitch, in the stadiums, from a footballing perspective. Phenomenal, great.
Well, Saudi Arabia beating Argentina.
Saudi Arabia beating
really
Argentina.
Set the tone for the region,
absolutely,
right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you know, and then Morocco just recently beating Belgium yesterday. I mean, that in itself is a phenomenal story as well. This is the first World Cup in the Arab world. This is the first World Cup in the Middle East, in the Islamic world. You see it not only in terms of the teams participating, but you see it in the stadiums. I mean, I was seeing some of the punditry where you had the fans. It was predominantly red Moroccan supporters. And it's not just Moroccans flying over here. It's supporters of the Moroccan national team from the Arab population, living in Qatar, visiting Qatar, Saudi supporters who are supporting Morocco, Moroccan supporters who are supporting Saudi and Tunisia and so on. You know, for our part of the world, for our region, this is a, you know, I have to say, you know, as Qataris, as Arabs, we're extremely proud of this moment.
How have you reacted as a senior Qatari, one of the real key people in this World Cup, particularly from the criticism from the UK, for example?
I think, you know, from day one, what we tried to do is distinguish between 2 forms of criticism. There's constructive criticism that we've taken on board. We've engaged with, we've talked to our critics who had a genuine interest in terms of, you know, progress or working with us towards utilizing this tournament as a transformational vehicle for Qatar and for the region. And as I said, we've engaged with them, we've discussed things with them, and they've become partners in the end. And then there's, of course, criticism that I think is based on misinformation, misrepresented facts, misstated facts, and even towards, you know, these, whether it's media outlets or individuals, we've also reached out and tried to engage. and try to set the facts straight. And some, unfortunately, have not been as receptive of our efforts. But nevertheless, we've always said one thing. The most important element is our response is always going to be by actions, as opposed to words.
But Gary Lineker, who fronts the BBC coverage, he's a friend of mine, full disclosure. Big fan of his work over the years, both on the pitch and off. But he did a sort of monologue at the start of the BBC's coverage, pointing out all the bad things about Qatar. And all I felt was he didn't do that at the Russia World Cup.
No.
They didn't run your opening ceremony this time, the BBC on the main channel. They did in Russia. They ran it, for example, with the China Olympics at Beijing Winter Olympics.
Yes.
It seems to me to be a bit of a double standard there.
Well, it's disappointing, for an institution such as the BBC, especially, or in particular BBC Sports, an institution that is always known, or at least as I grew up, was always known to be, objective in stating the facts and allowing for, different points of view to be addressed and for the audience to make their own decision. For the actions that you've mentioned, for example, and again, in particular with Gary, the frustration is that we've reached out to him. We've reached out to him many times. The latest, if I'm not mistaken, was in February, about 3 or 4 times, for a sit-down. And at the very least, again, with the idea, we'll present our case. Whatever judgment you want to pass later on, that's up to you. But at least for us to present the counter-argument, show what we've done, how we've utilized this tournament, and how really this tournament is an historical event. What you see in the stadiums, what you see outside, the engagement, the cultural engagement, the fans, the way people are dressing.
Yeah.
I mean, just a little side story. Over the years, as I did a lot of interviews, especially from back home, I'm always dressed like this. And a lot of my friends, whether they're journalists and even some experts, always try to convince me to dress in a Western way. Even if I'm in Qatar, dress in a Western way.
Why should we force on you anything, frankly? Whether it's our values that we have in the UK, the way we dress, the way we talk, the way we drink. I'm not sure that we're in any position to take the high moral ground as a country which, for example, invaded Iraq illegally in 2003, an invasion I opposed as a newspaper editor. Does that give us bragging rights on morality with the Middle East? I'm not sure that it does. I do want to turn to some things where I think I would say I have a criticism, notably migrant workers. The Guardian newspaper said that 6,500 migrant workers have died as a result of the World Cup construction. I've looked into this, as have many other fact checkers. That figure is deeply misleading because it's actually the number of migrants who've died in total in the last 12 years since the bid was confirmed for Qatar of any cause. But do you know how many migrant workers have died as a result of any construction since the announcement of the bid?
In terms of, what we did from day one, at least within the organization that I'm responsible for, is we were committed towards being transparent and, capturing any incidents, whether it's in terms of, misses, near misses, accidents, or unfortunately deaths. And we decided to capture, and we made a decision in terms of obviously work-related deaths as defined under the industry standard, but also capturing what we consider to be non-work-related deaths. And this is only purely in relation to the stadiums and the projects that we're responsible for.
And what are those totals?
And that's 3 work-related deaths and 37 non-work-related deaths.
Right. These are deaths specific to World Cup construction, the stadiums.
Specific to World Cup stadiums.
Do you know how many people have died in Qatar since you won the bid in the last 12 years from any construction related to anything to do with the World Cup? In other words, new hotels, new bridges, whatever. In other words, what is the honest, realistic total, do you think, of migrant workers who've died as a result of work they're doing for the World Cup in totality?
The estimate is around 400. Between 400 and 500. I don't have the exact number. That's something that's being discussed.
I mean, there will be people, Hassan, who say that's a lot of people.
One death is too many.
But they would say 400 is a price too big to pay. What do you say to that?
What I will say is one death is a death too many, plain and simple. And I think every year the health and safety standards on the sites are improving, at least on our sites, the World Cup sites, the ones that we're responsible for, most definitely, to the extent that you've got trade unions, representatives of the German trade union, representatives of the Swiss trade union.
But do you accept?
Have just to make this point, have commended the work that's been done on the World Cup sites and the improvement.
Right, but do you accept then, because of the improvements that have been made, that at the start they weren't good enough, the standards?
I think overall the need for labor reform in itself dictates that yes, improvements had to happen. And just so we're clear, this was something that was recognized before we bid. The improvements that have happened isn't because of the World Cup. These are improvements that we knew we had to do because of our own values. Improvements that had to happen, whether it's in terms of health and safety standards, whether it's in terms of improving the accommodation standards, whether it's in terms of dismantling the kafala system. Now, what the World Cup did, the World Cup served as a vehicle, as an accelerant, as a catalyst. It, because of the spotlight, which we recognized early on was going to be shed, it allowed, it caused a lot of these initiatives, not only in terms of improvement in the legislation, but in the enforcement of it as well. And that's where today, where we led to, we got to a position where our most ardent of critics consider us today to be a benchmark in the region.
And let me ask you about LGBT rights, because there's been a lot of furore about this, and in particular the wearing of the armband. So the England captain Harry Kane and several other European country captains were all going to wear the One Love armband. Did you personally have any problem with them doing that?
If it was done specifically to address Qatar, I had a problem with it.
Right.
If it was done if it was something that was going to be done, and the European nations were going to be holding, just wearing it continuously and constantly, then of course that's a decision that they, that's up to them.
Was FIFA right to say if they wear it, they'd all get bookings?
Again, it's a decision that FIFA's made between them and the European nations, and I think it became a standoff, and that was a discussion that was between them. For me, what I'm trying to, what for our position and my personal position is, look, we've always said everybody's welcome. And we've worked very hard to create an environment and to ensure that people from all parts of the world and all walks of life come into Qatar, engage and interact with people from the Arab world and the Middle East, even though we might not necessarily see eye to eye on certain things, even though we might not agree on certain things, but everybody's welcome. And the point is, to come to terms with the fact that we won't see eye to eye, but we can still have mutual respect for each other and still find a way of moving forward, celebrating together. And I think...
Is it safe for gay people to be in Qatar now?
It's safe for everybody to be in Qatar, yes. Unequivocally, Piers, yes.
And safe for gay people to live in Qatar?
Yes. I think it's safe for everybody to live in Qatar, Piers.
But there would be a problem if a gay couple, for example, showed demonstrative displays of
Public display of affection generally is not part of our culture. Public display of affection is not part of our culture. It's not, regardless of who you are, regardless of your sexual identification or and so on, public display of affection is not. And again, I say that, and I mean within reason. Holding hands in the streets is fine.
For gay people?
Holding hands in the streets for anybody is fine.
It is?
But what I'm saying is, there's public intimacy. Public intimacy is not part of our culture. We're a relatively conservative culture. In the West, the individual's personal rights always trump, let's say, the community rights. That's what's most sacred. Now, there are other societies, our society being one of them, the Arab world and the Middle East, where it's the communal values, it's the values of the community and society, which is also, again, fundamentally related to religion as well. That is of a higher value, of higher importance. And again, the question then becomes, what is more important? If you're coming from a Western value-based system, you look at individual rights, regardless of any other aspect that should always be sacred. And from our part of the world, it's the religious values that are there. What I'm trying to say is, at points in time, these discussions, to try to find a winner out of them, or try to find, for somebody to kind of defeat somebody else in terms of the discussions, the reality is that there will be no winner. But what we have to do is find, or at least that's what we try to do, is find common ground. Find something at least that unites us. And come to terms with the fact that we might not see eye to eye on certain things, but we have to find a way of coexisting and moving forward. And what this World Cup has showcased, again, taking it back to what you see on the streets, taking back to where you see the engagement, taking it back to where you're seeing, the Brazilian and the Saudi singing "Where's Messi" after the loss after the defeat of Argentina, seeing the Argentinians coming in, finding the Saudis and saying "Where's Salam" when they lost against Poland. Looking at people dressing like me, I've seen somebody dressing, wearing the thobe, but in the Portuguese flag. I've seen the Croatian flag. I saw a tweet yesterday that for me was just absolutely funny. A guy saying, never in my life was I expecting to see a Spaniard rushing because he's late to watch the Spanish match, holding onto his headgear. What's happening outside is a celebration of cultures.
I want to end on a positive. It's been a positive interview. Who's going to win the World Cup?
Oof. You know...
Give me a name. I need a name. Stick your neck out.
I'll play
this back in 3 weeks.
I'll say France.
France?
I think France...
Led by Mbappe.
Led by Mbappe and the French team, yes.
I think England have a good chance.
England have got a great chance.
If Harry Kane remains fit and they play Foden. But I also think Portugal have a chance with my...